My son vanished for 2 weeks, so I went to find him. What I discovered in my own basement destroyed everything I thought I knew about family. A hidden USB drive, surveillance photos of my house, and a recording of my son's voice planning something unthinkable with a stranger. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. The rain drummed against my basement windows that October morning as I descended the creaking wooden steps toolbox in hand. Another Monday, another household repair, the kind of routine that had defined my retirement years since Beatrice passed. The circuit breaker in the southeast corner had been acting up for weeks, cutting power to the upstairs guest room where she used to keep her sewing machine. At 8 sharp, I switched off the main breaker and removed the metal panel cover, the familiar weight of my electrician's tools, bringing back memories of 4 decades in the trade. Portland's October drizzle created the perfect soundtrack for basement work. Steady, predictable, comforting in its consistency. That's odd, I muttered, examining the 20-amp breaker that should have been solid after 40 years of reliable service. This wire shouldn't be loose after all these years. The copper conductor had somehow worked free from its terminal, dangling like a broken promise. But as I traced the wire back toward its source, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. The electrical box's mounting had shifted, creating a gap in the drywall behind it, a gap that revealed something that didn't belong. Beatrice always said the basement held our family's secrets. I used to laugh at her superstitions, but standing there in the dim work light, her words felt prophetic. My arthritic fingers worked carefully to widen the opening, revealing a small cavity between the wall studs. Inside, wrapped in a clear plastic bag and secured with electrical tape, was a USB drive, not mine, not Beatrice's. Someone had deliberately hidden this device in my wall. I stared at the drive for a full minute, my retired electrician's mind trying to process how it had gotten there. The house was 42 years old. We'd built it ourselves in 1992. Every wire run under my supervision. This USB drive was maybe 5 years old, maximum. Someone had accessed this wall recently. Upstairs in my kitchen, I plugged the drive into the laptop my neighbor Cordelia had helped me buy last Christmas. The screen filled with folders labeled by date going back 6 months. My hands trembled as I opened the first one. Photographs, dozens of them. My house from every conceivable angle, front, backsides, even aerial shots that must have been taken from a drone. Interior photos showing my living room, kitchen, bedroom. Someone had been inside my home, documenting everything with methodical precision. But it was the audio file that destroyed my world. The old man keeps everything in that safety deposit box at Portland Federal Credit Union, said a voice I'd known for 37 years. My son Donovan speaking with the casual tone he'd used to discuss the weather. Every Tuesday at 10, like clockwork, never varies his routine. Another voice, unfamiliar and cold. Security. Minimal. He's trusting old school. Thinks living in a good neighborhood means he's safe. I sat frozen in my kitchen chair, listening to my only child describe my routines, my habits, my vulnerabilities to a stranger. The boy I'd taught to ride a bike helped through college. Supported through 3 failed businesses, he was planning something terrible. The recording continued for 12 more minutes. 12 minutes of my son selling out his father's security, his trust, his love. 12 minutes that revealed a betrayal so complete, so calculated, that it left me gasping for breath in my empty house. But this was only the beginning. The recording contained something that would change everything I thought I knew about my son, and the danger we were both in was far greater than I could have imagined. The afternoon light filtering through my kitchen windows felt different somehow, as if the morning's discovery had changed the very quality of sunlight in my home. I sat at the same table where Beatrice and I had shared 42 years of meals the USB drive, and my laptop creating an alien landscape among the familiar salt and pepper shakers. At 2 o'clock sharp, I opened the files again, forcing myself to study each photograph with the methodical approach that had served me well as an electrician. Someone had spent months documenting my life exterior shots from across the street, interior photos that could only have been taken during my Tuesday credit union visits, even pictures of my basement workshop that made my skin crawl. The recording played again, Donovan's voice discussing my routines with clinical detachment. Tuesday mornings at 10 never varies. How many times had I mentioned my weekly banking routine to him? How many innocent father-son conversations had he filed away for later use? My hands shook as I reached for my coffee cup. 37 years of raising that boy, and this was what it had come to: surveillance photos and betrayal plans hidden in my own walls. The phone's shrill ring cut through my brooding at 2:45. "Dad," Donovan's voice cracked with what sounded like genuine panic. Dad, I am at the hospital. There's been an accident. Every paternal instinct screamed at me to respond to help to fix whatever was wrong. But the morning's discovery had planted seeds of doubt that bloomed instantly. What happened, son? I rear-ended someone on Highway 26. The other drivers hurt bad, and my insurance. Dad, they're saying I need $25,000 for a settlement, or they're pressing charges. I'm scared. $25,000. The same amount I'd refused him 6 months ago for his guaranteed cryptocurrency investment. The same amount he'd demanded last Christmas for his failed food truck venture. Which hospital? Donovan. A pause. Too long. OHSU. Dad, I don't have time to explain everything. Can you help me or not? The old me would have been in the car, already checkbook in hand. But the old me hadn't found surveillance photos in his basement wall. The old me hadn't heard his son's voice planning something terrible with a stranger. I need to think about this. Think about it. His panic shifted to anger with practiced ease. Dad, I could go to jail. Is that what you want? What I wanted was my son back. The boy who'd helped me wire this very kitchen, who'd held Beatrice's hand during her final hospital stay. But that boy seemed to exist only in my increasingly unreliable memories. I'll call you back. The line went dead before I could say goodbye. I sat staring at the phone, my electrician's mind trying to troubleshoot the problem. Either my son was genuinely in trouble and needed help, or this was part of whatever scheme that recording had revealed. Both possibilities terrified me. The knock at my back door came at 4:15, gentle but persistent. Cordelia Murphy stood on my porch, her silver hair damp from the afternoon drizzle, holding a covered casserole dish. Thought you might like some of my famous tuna noodle casserole, she said, studying my face with the sharp eyes that had managed unruly seventh graders for 30 years. You look troubled, Clarence. Cordelia had been our neighbor since 1985, had brought similar casseroles. After Beatrice's funeral, had helped me navigate my first smartphone purchase. If anyone deserved my trust, it was her. Did you happen to see Donovan around the neighborhood this morning? Funny you should ask. I saw his car at the coffee shop on Hawthorne around 10:30. Looked fine to me, no damage at all. She tilted her head. Why do you ask? The pieces clicked together with the finality of a circuit breaker tripping. No accident. No hospital. No emergency. Just another lie from a son who'd been planning something terrible for months. Cordelia, do you know any good private investigators? Her eyebrows rose, but she didn't ask questions. A teacher's wisdom about when to probe and when to simply provide support. I might know someone. Retired police detective who does freelance work. Very discreet. As she wrote down the contact information, I felt something shift inside me. The grieving father was stepping aside, making room for someone harder, more strategic. Someone who understood that love sometimes required verification. 37 years old and still lying to his father. But this would be the last time Donovan Voss played his old man for a fool. I needed proof of what my son was really doing. What the investigator found would shatter everything I thought I knew about the boy I'd raised and reveal a web of deception that stretched far beyond a simple con game. The rain hammered downtown Portland's streets as I climbed the stairs to Marcus Webb's third-floor office, each step heavier than the last. 3 days had passed since I'd hired the private investigator. Cordelia recommended 3 days of restless nights and unanswered questions about the son I thought I knew. Webb's office occupied a corner of an old brick building on Southwest Morrison, the kind of place that had probably housed insurance agents and accountants for decades, before becoming home to retired cops who specialized in uncomfortable truths. The waiting room smelled of coffee and old leather professional, but worn around the edges. Mr. Voss, come in. Marcus Webb stood as I entered his inner office, a compact man in his mid-40s, with the kind of steady gaze that suggested he'd seen everything at least twice. His desk was organized chaos file folders, photographs, and a laptop displaying what looked like surveillance footage. I appreciate you taking this case on such short notice, Mr. Webb. Cordelia Murphy's word carries weight with me. She helped my daughter through some tough times in middle school. He gestured to a chair across from his desk. I have to warn you, Mr. Voss, what I found isn't what any father wants to hear. My hands gripped the chair arms as Webb opened the first folder. The photographs inside showed Donovan's silver Honda Civic in various parking lots, time-stamped over the past 3 days. But it was the locations that made my stomach drop. Your son has been visiting Spirit Mountain Casino daily for the past 6 months, sometimes twice a day. The staff knows him by name. Webb's voice carried the flat professionalism of someone delivering bad news for a living. These photos show him entering at 9 a.m. Tuesday, the same day he called you about the supposed accident. I studied the images my son walking into the casino with the confident stride of someone heading to work, not the desperate shuffle of a man fleeing a car accident. The timestamp read 9:47 a.m., less than an hour before his panicked call to me. How bad is it? Webb opened a second folder, this one containing financial documents that made my electrician's pension seem like pocket change. Bank statements, credit card bills, loan applications, all bearing Donovan's signature in increasingly desperate amounts. Your son has a serious gambling problem, Mr. Voss. Based on what I could piece together from public records and casino sources, he's roughly $35,000 in debt. $35,000, more than my annual pension. More than the safety deposit box emergency fund Beatrice and I had spent decades accumulating. The number hit me like a physical blow. To the casino. Webb's expression darkened. That's where it gets dangerous. The casino debt is maybe $5,000 they cut him off months ago. The real money is owed to private lenders. Loan sharks, Mr. Voss. The kind of people who don't file paperwork with the Better Business Bureau. He slid another set of photographs across the desk. These showed Donovan meeting with men I didn't recognize, hard-faced individuals, in expensive cars conversations that looked anything but friendly. One photo captured my son handing an envelope to a tall man with prison tattoos covering his forearms. These aren't the kind of people who accept late payments, Webb continued. I've seen what happens when debts like this go unpaid. Your son is in serious physical danger. The office felt smaller. Suddenly the rain outside more ominous. My boy, the child I'd taught to change electrical outlets, who'd helped me install the security system in this very building 20 years ago, was mixed up with criminals who could hurt him. Or worse. What do you recommend? Honestly, police involvement. This is beyond family problems now. These loan shark operations often connect to larger criminal enterprises. Your son might be more than just a debtor, and he could be involved in their collection efforts. The implications hit me like cold water. The USB drive, the surveillance photos, the detailed knowledge of my routines and banking habits. Was Donovan planning to rob his own father to pay off criminals? My boy is in over his head, isn't he? Mr. Voss, based on what I've documented, your son isn't just in over his head. He's drowning, and he's looking for someone to pull down with him. I left Webb's office with a manila folder full of evidence and a heart full of dread. The rain had intensified, turning Portland's streets into rivers that reflected the gray sky like broken mirrors. Somewhere in this city, my son was planning something terrible, driven by debts I couldn't imagine and desperation I'd never seen. But the gambling was just the surface. What I would find in Beatrice's old papers would reveal the true scope of Donovan's betrayal and show me that this nightmare had been building for far longer than anyone realized. The evening light filtered through our bedroom curtains with the same golden warmth that had illuminated 42 years of marriage. But tonight it felt different, heavier somehow, as if the very air carried the weight of secrets waiting to be discovered. I sat on Beatrice's side of the bed, surrounded by the cardboard boxes I'd never had the heart to sort through since her passing 3 years ago. Her personal papers had been calling to me since Webb's revelation about Donovan's criminal connections. If anyone would have noticed troubling patterns in our son's behavior, it would have been Beatrice. As a registered nurse for 38 years, she'd developed an eye for symptoms. Others missed a talent for reading between the lines of what people said versus what they meant. The first box contained her professional certificates, continuing education records, and thank you cards from grateful patients, the documented evidence of a life spent caring for others. But it was the second box that made my hands tremble. Her personal diary bound in faded blue leather, with entries dating back to 1995. I opened to a random page from 2008. Donovan asked for money again today. Always an emergency, never repaid. Arnold doesn't see it, but our boy is developing a pattern. The restaurant venture failed because he spent the investment money on something else. I can see it in his eyes, the same look I've seen in patients hiding their pain medication addiction. My wife had been documenting Donovan's lies for 15 years. Page after page revealed a meticulous record of every loan, every sob story, every promise to pay back money that never materialized. The failed food truck in 2015, $8,000. The cryptocurrency sure thing in 2018, $12,000. The online marketing course that would change everything in 2020, $6,500. Each entry written in Beatrice's careful handwriting, each one expressing growing concern about our son's character. But it was the financial summary she'd compiled in the back pages that took my breath away. Column after column of dates, amounts, and purposes, a forensic accounting of 15 years of manipulation. The total at the bottom of the final page was circled in red ink, $127,000. $127,000. More than twice my annual pension. More than we'd spent on our mortgage. All of it borrowed by our son. None of it ever repaid, most of it spent on gambling and failed schemes that existed only in Donovan's imagination. How did you keep track of all this? I whispered to the empty room, running my finger along Beatrice's precise calculations. How did you bear knowing? The answer came in her final diary entries, dated just weeks before her cancer diagnosis became terminal. Her handwriting was shakier, but her resolve was clear. I've contacted our attorney about changing the will. Donovan's inheritance needs to be reduced from 50% to 10%. The bulk should go to charity children's cancer research, something that will honor the love we tried to teach him, but he never learned to give. She'd protected our legacy, even while dying, understanding that our son would squander whatever we left him, just as he'd squandered everything we'd given him while we were alive. But it was the sealed envelope tucked between the diary's final pages that stopped my heart completely. My name was written across the front in Beatrice's careful script, with instructions, open only if Donovan's behavior becomes dangerous. Inside her final letter to me, my dearest Arnold, if you're reading this, our son has probably gone too far. I've watched him lie to us for years, seen him manipulate your generous heart, and I fear what he might do when desperation overtakes whatever conscience he has left. The boy we raised is still in there somewhere, but he's been buried under years of bad choices and easy money. Don't let him drag you down with him. You taught me that some electrical problems can't be fixed sometimes. You have to cut the power to prevent a fire. I've left you the name of someone who can help when that time comes. Her name is Detective Sarah Kim Portland, Police Financial Crimes Unit. I met her when she spoke at the hospital about elder abuse. She understands families like ours. I sat in the growing darkness holding my wife's final gift, not just the warning I needed, but the solution she'd researched while fighting for her own life. Beatrice had seen this moment coming years before I'd found that USB drive in my basement wall. You knew, didn't you, Beatrice? You saw this coming long before I did. The evening shadows deepened around me, but for the first time since Monday morning, I didn't feel alone. My wife had left me one final gift, the name of someone who could help me save what remained of our family's honor. Beatrice had left me one final gift, the name of someone who could help me navigate the dangerous waters ahead. Someone who understood that sometimes love meant saying no, even when it broke your heart. The Portland Police Bureau's downtown headquarters loomed against the gray Monday morning sky like a fortress of justice, its concrete walls promising the kind of professional help I desperately needed. I clutched Beatrice's letter in my coat pocket as I climbed the steps, her words echoing in my mind, Detective Sarah, Kim, Financial Crimes, Unit. But when I reached the front desk, the duty sergeant shook his head apologetically. Detective Kim is testifying in court all week. However, Detective Sterling Brooks handles similar cases. He's available this morning if you'd like to speak with him. Brooks's office occupied a corner of the third floor, its walls lined with commendations and case files that spoke of 2 decades fighting Portland's criminal element. The man himself was compact and sharp-eyed, with graying temples, and the kind of steady presence that suggested he'd heard every story at least twice. Mr. Voss, I understand you have concerns about your son's activities. Brooks gestured to a chair across from his desk, which was organized with military precision. Tell me what's brought you here. I laid out the evidence methodically, the USB drive, the surveillance photos, the fake emergency call, Webb's investigation results, and Beatrice's 15-year documentation. Brooks listened without interruption, making notes in a leather portfolio that looked worn from years of similar conversations. This is quite comprehensive, Mr. Voss. Your wife was remarkably thorough. He studied Beatrice's financial calculations with professional interest. Before we discuss next steps, I need to share something that might surprise you. Brooks turned to his computer terminal, fingers clicking across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. The screen filled with official forms and case numbers that made my stomach tighten with recognition. Your son tried to have you declared mentally incompetent last year. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? March 15th, 2023. Donovan Voss filed an elder abuse complaint against you with Adult Protective Services. He claimed you were hiding money, becoming paranoid, and showing signs of dementia that made you vulnerable to financial exploitation. I stared at the screen, reading my son's sworn statement, accusing me of mental incompetence. Every Tuesday banking routine I'd mentioned, every security precaution I'd taken, every careful financial decision, all of it twisted into evidence of cognitive decline. The investigation was thorough. Brooks continued scrolling through the file. Social workers interviewed you, examined your medical records, assessed your living situation. They found no evidence of mental impairment or self-neglect. The complaint was dismissed as unfounded. I never knew about any investigation. Adult Protective Services conducts discreet inquiries to avoid family conflicts. But here's what's interesting. 3 weeks after his complaint was dismissed, your son attempted to obtain power of attorney over your finances. Brooks opened another file, this one containing legal documents, bearing Donovan's signature. He claimed you'd requested the arrangement due to increasing confusion about financial matters. Fortunately, Oregon law requires medical certification from 2 independent physicians for elderly power of attorney cases. When your doctor confirmed you were mentally competent, the application was denied. The systematic nature of Donovan's planning became clear. First, try to have me declared incompetent. When that failed, attempt legal control over my finances. When that failed, resort to surveillance and criminal conspiracy. Detective, my son has been planning this for months, hasn't he? Mr. Voss, based on what I'm seeing, your son has been working various angles for over a year. But there's more. Brooks pulled up a third file, this one from the criminal records database. Donovan has a prior arrest we need to discuss. My hands gripped the chair arms as Brooks revealed my son's criminal history, a check fraud charge from 2 years ago, reduced to a misdemeanor through plea bargaining. The victim had been an elderly woman from Donovan's neighborhood, someone who'd trusted him to help with home repairs. The pattern is consistent, Mr. Voss. Your son targets elderly individuals who trust him, exploits their generosity, and when confronted, claims misunderstanding or emergency circumstances. What do you recommend? Brooks leaned back in his chair, studying me with the calculating gaze of someone who'd spent decades building cases against criminals smarter than they thought they were. A controlled operation. We let your son proceed with whatever he's planning, but under our supervision. Full surveillance evidence gathering coordination with the district attorney's office. When he makes his move, we'll be ready. The idea of using myself as bait should have terrified me, but instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced since finding that USB drive hope. Professional help. A plan that could protect other elderly victims while ensuring my son faced consequences for his choices. What would that involve? Patience, Mr. Voss, and trust in the system your tax dollars have built to protect people like you. Brooks had a plan, but first we needed to identify the other players in Donovan's scheme, the criminal associates. Webb's photos had revealed the network that had turned my son from a failed entrepreneur into something far more dangerous. Wednesday afternoon's pale sunlight filtered through my living room windows as I stared at the collection of small black devices spread across my coffee table. Detective Brooks had recommended professional-grade surveillance equipment, but at 71, the technology looked as foreign to me as spacecraft components. Don't worry, Clarence. These cameras are simpler than they appear. Cordelia Murphy's voice carried the patient tone I remembered from her teaching days as she examined the instruction manual with practiced efficiency. We'll have you monitoring everything from your smartphone within the hour. I'd called Cordelia that morning explaining Brooks's recommendation for home surveillance before the sting operation. Her immediate offer to help had been a blessing. My arthritic fingers weren't designed for delicate electronic work, and her sharp mind had always been better with technical details than mine. The first camera goes by your front door, she explained, attaching the magnetic mount to my porch light fixture with surprising dexterity. Motion activation night vision, direct feed to your phone. If anyone approaches your house, you'll know immediately. As we worked through the installation, Cordelia's competence with the surveillance equipment began to seem less like helpful neighbor knowledge and more like professional expertise. She positioned cameras with strategic precision-tested angles for optimal coverage and configured the smartphone app with the fluency of someone who'd done this before. Cordelia, how do you know so much about surveillance systems? She paused in her work, studying me with those sharp eyes that had managed countless seventh graders over the decades. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight I'd never heard before. I wasn't always a teacher, Clarence. 20 years FBI financial crimes before I came to Portland. Surveillance was part of the job. The revelation hit me like discovering another USB drive in my walls. My gentle neighbor, the woman who'd brought casseroles after Beatrice's funeral and helped me navigate smartphone technology, was a retired federal agent. Why didn't you ever mention this? People treat you differently when they know you were FBI. They either want you to solve their problems, or they worry you're still investigating them. She adjusted the kitchen camera's angle with professional precision. I came to Portland to be just Cordelia. Murphy, retired teacher. But sometimes the old skills come in handy. By 4:30, we had 4 cameras positioned strategically around my house, all feeding live video to my phone. The image quality was remarkably clear, showing every detail of my front yard back porch and the side alley where someone might attempt covert entry. That's when we saw him. "Clarence, look at camera 3. Cordelia's voice carried the sharp edge of someone who'd spent decades identifying threats. "That man has been watching your house for 3 days. The figure on my phone screen moved with predatory patience, studying my home from across the street with the systematic attention of someone conducting professional surveillance. Tall, lean, with the kind of stillness that suggested violence was always an option. "I need to call Detective Brooks." Brooks answered on the second ring, and within minutes, we were running the stranger's image through police databases. The results made my blood run cold. "Thaddeus Pike, age 45. Brooks' voice crackled through my phone speaker. "Extensive criminal record breaking and entering armed robbery assault. He's been in and out of the system for 20 years, specializes in home invasions targeting elderly victims." Cordelia leaned closer to hear Brooks' briefing, her FBI training evident in the way she processed the information with professional calm. "Detective, this isn't a random criminal," she observed. "Pike's surveillance pattern suggests he's working with someone who has detailed knowledge of Clarence's routines, someone who told him when to watch, what to look for." "That's what worries me," Brooks replied. "Pike doesn't work alone. He's part of a network that targets elderly homeowners across the Pacific Northwest, but they don't usually have inside information this detailed." The implications crystallized with horrible clarity. Donovan hadn't just gambled away his future, he'd sold out his father to professional criminals who specialized in victimizing people exactly like me. "Pike's not working alone. This is bigger than we thought," Brooks continued. "Your son has connected with a criminal organization that's been operating in Oregon for years. We're not just dealing with a desperate gambler anymore." As the afternoon shadows lengthened across my yard, I watched Pike continue his surveillance through the camera feed, knowing that somewhere in Portland, my son was coordinating with this predator to rob his own father. Pike was just the muscle. The real mastermind was someone much closer to home, someone who'd been planning this betrayal for longer than I could have imagined. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October clarity that made Portland's skyline look like a postcard, but I felt none of the beauty as I sat in the police station's briefing room at 8 sharp. Detective Brooks stood before a whiteboard covered with photographs, floor plans, and tactical diagrams that reduced my home to a crime scene waiting to happen. "Gentlemen, this is a textbook elder fraud operation." Brooks addressed the 5 undercover officers who would coordinate today's arrests. 2 suspects, Thaddeus Pike, professional criminal with multiple B&E convictions, and Donovan Voss, the victim's son, who's provided inside intelligence. Hearing my son described as a criminal suspect in official police terminology felt like a knife twisting in my chest. 37 years of fatherhood had led to this moment, watching trained officers plan his arrest. "Mr. Voss will leave his house visibly at 9 a.m., establishing the all-clear signal Pike has been waiting for," Brooks continued. "Surveillance cameras are active, recording everything. We need both suspects inside the residence with evidence of criminal intent before we move." Officer Martinez, a compact woman with sharp eyes, raised her hand. "What if they don't both show up?" "Pike will come. He's been casing the house for days. Donovan is the wild card, but intelligence suggests he'll arrive to coordinate the operation." Brooks looked at me with professional sympathy. "Remember, we need them inside with the evidence before we move. No premature arrests." At 9 o'clock, I performed the most difficult acting job of my life. Walking to my truck with deliberate visibility, loading my gym bag with theatrical care, backing out of my driveway with the same casual routine Pike had been studying for weeks. But instead of driving to the gym, I parked 3 blocks away and walked to Cordelia's house, where she had her laptop connected to my surveillance system. "All cameras are recording," Cordelia confirmed her FBI training, evident in the calm efficiency with which she managed the technical aspects. "Brooks has units positioned on all sides of your property. When they move, it'll be fast." The waiting was agony. We watched empty rooms through 4 camera feeds, knowing that somewhere in Portland professional criminals were preparing to violate my home and steal everything Beatrice and I had built together. At 10 sharp, Pike appeared on camera 3, approaching my back door with the confident stride of someone who'd done this dozens of times before. He worked the lock with practiced skill, disappearing inside my house within 90 seconds. "Phase 1 complete," Cordelia murmured, speaking into her phone to coordinate with Brooks. "Pike is inside, moving toward the basement." My heart hammered as I watched the man who'd been stalking my house navigate my kitchen with criminal purpose. Pike moved directly toward the basement stairs, following the route Donovan had undoubtedly provided in their planning sessions. At 10:30, Donovan's silver Honda appeared in my driveway. 37 years of fatherhood comes down to this moment, I whispered, watching my son walk toward the house where he'd grown up, where Beatrice had sung him to sleep, where we'd celebrated birthdays and Christmases and graduations, all of it now reduced to the scene of his betrayal. Donovan entered through the front door using the key I'd given him years ago when he was still someone I trusted. The surveillance cameras captured everything: his casual entry, his movement toward the basement to coordinate with Pike, his complete unawareness that police officers surrounded the house. Both suspects are inside, Cordelia reported to Brooks. They're in the basement area. Pike appears to be showing Donovan something. Through the basement camera, I watched Pike and my son examine the loose floorboards where Beatrice and I had hidden our emergency savings. Pike had a crowbar. Donovan had a flashlight. They were discussing something with the casual efficiency of partners in crime. All unit suspects are inside. Move in now. Brooks' voice crackled through Cordelia's phone. What happened next unfolded with the precision of a military operation. Police officers entered through both doors simultaneously, their voices echoing through my house. Portland Police. Nobody move hands where we can see them. The basement camera captured Pike's professional resignation. He'd been caught before, knew the routine, understood that resistance would only make things worse. But Donovan's face showed pure panic, the desperate terror of someone realizing that consequences were finally arriving for years of bad choices. Within minutes, both men were in handcuffs, their criminal conspiracy documented by multiple cameras and witnessed by trained officers who would testify in court about what they'd seen. But as the handcuffs clicked around my son's wrists, as I watched him being led away from the house where Beatrice had raised him with love and hope, I realized the hardest part was yet to come: facing the boy I'd failed to save from himself. The walk back to my house felt like crossing a battlefield, where the smoke was just beginning to clear. Police cars lined my quiet street like official punctuation marks, their red and blue lights painting my neighborhood in colors I'd never wanted to see. Cordelia walked beside me, her steady presence the only thing keeping me upright as we approached the scene of my son's arrest. Detective Brooks met us at my front gate, his professional demeanor softened by what might have been sympathy. Mr. Voss, both suspects are in custody. Pike was found with your property cash from your safety deposit box, personal documents, even some of your wife's jewelry. We have everything we need for prosecution. Through my living room window, I could see Thaddeus Pike sitting in the back of a patrol car, staring straight ahead with the blank expression of someone calculating prison time. He'd been through this before, understood the system, accepted his fate with professional resignation, but it was the second patrol car that made my legs feel weak. Donovan sat hunched forward in the back seat, his hands cuffed behind him, his face a mask of desperate panic that I'd never seen before. This wasn't the confident man who demanded money from me 2 weeks ago, or the manipulative voice I'd heard on that USB recording. This was someone whose carefully constructed world of lies and schemes had finally collapsed. "Dad!" His voice cracked as he saw me approaching the sound, carrying across my front yard like a wounded animal's cry. "Dad, please, tell them this is all a mistake." I stopped at the patrol car's window, looking down at the boy I'd taught to ride a bike, helped through college, supported through countless failed ventures. But the man staring back at me was a stranger who'd sold out his father's trust for gambling debts and criminal schemes. "Dad, how could you do this to me? I'm your son." The words hit me like physical blows, each one designed to trigger the parental instincts that had protected him for 37 years. Even now caught red-handed with stolen property, Donovan was trying to manipulate me with guilt and family loyalty. But I thought of Beatrice's diary documenting 15 years of lies. I thought of the $127,000 he'd borrowed and never repaid. I thought of the surveillance photos in my basement wall, the fake emergency calls, the elder abuse complaints filed to have me declared incompetent. You stopped being my son when you decided to rob me. The finality in my own voice surprised me. 37 years of fatherhood distilled into a single sentence that severed whatever remained of our relationship. You have the right to remain silent. Officer Martinez continued reading Donovan his Miranda rights, her professional voice cutting through his desperate protests. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Donovan twisted in the back seat, trying to maintain eye contact with me as the patrol car's window rolled up. I could see his lips moving, forming words I couldn't hear and didn't want to understand. The boy who'd once helped me wire electrical outlets was gone, replaced by someone who saw his own father as nothing more than a target to be exploited. Detective Brooks appeared at my elbow as the patrol cars pulled away from my curb, carrying both criminals toward booking and arraignment. The evidence collection will take another hour, Mr. Voss. We found detailed floor plans of your house, photographs of your daily routines, even a written schedule of your banking habits. Your son provided them with everything they needed. Neighbors had gathered on their porches watching the police activity with the kind of morbid curiosity that accompanies any disruption of suburban routine. Mrs. Patterson from across the street waved sympathetically. The young couple next door stared with undisguised fascination. By evening, the entire neighborhood would know that Clarence Voss had called the police on his own son. Mr. Voss will need a formal statement about the stolen items. Brooks continued consulting his notepad. The district attorney will want victim impact information for the prosecution. I nodded, understanding that my role was shifting from father to victim, from family member to prosecution witness. The legal system would take over, now processing Donovan and Pike through arraignment plea, bargaining and sentencing with the mechanical efficiency of American justice. Cordelia squeezed my arm gently. You did the right thing, Clarence. Beatrice would be proud. As the evidence collection team finished their work and packed away their cameras and fingerprint kits, I stood in my violated home, knowing that justice had been served, but feeling no satisfaction in the victory. The arrests were just the beginning. The legal system would decide their fate, but the harder question remained: how do you rebuild a life after your own child has tried to destroy everything you've worked to build? The Multnomah County Courthouse rose from downtown Portland streets like a temple to justice, its marble columns and brass fixtures speaking of the weight and dignity of American law. I climbed those steps on Monday morning, carrying Beatrice's leather portfolio filled with 15 years of documentation that would help ensure my son faced the consequences of his choices. Judge Patricia Hendricks presided over the arraignment with the calm authority of someone who'd spent decades balancing the scales of justice. Her courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, more intimate-making. The reading of charges feel like a family reckoning conducted under the watchful eye of the law. The state of Oregon versus Thaddeus Pike and Donovan Voss, the clerk announced. Charges include conspiracy to commit burglary, attempted theft in the first degree, and elder financial abuse. Hearing my son's name read alongside a career criminal's in official legal language felt like the final nail in the coffin of our relationship. Pike stood with professional resignation, understanding the system he'd navigated many times before. But Donovan looked lost, overwhelmed by the formal machinery of justice that was about to process his life into prison time. Tuesday brought Pike's plea hearing. His public defender had negotiated efficiently 4 years in state prison in exchange for his guilty plea and cooperation with ongoing elder fraud investigations. Pike accepted the deal with the same emotionless professionalism he'd shown during his arrest. Your Honor, my client acknowledges his crimes and accepts responsibility, Pike's attorney stated. He's prepared to provide information about other criminal enterprises targeting elderly Oregonians. Even in defeat, Pike was trading information for reduced time, his criminal career becoming a commodity in the legal marketplace. I felt no satisfaction watching him sentenced. He was just the tool my son had chosen to use against me. Wednesday was different. Wednesday was personal. Mr. Voss, would you like to provide a victim impact statement? Prosecutor Sarah Kim asked, her voice carrying the kind of professional compassion that acknowledged both justice and heartbreak. I stood in that courtroom looking at my son seated at the defendant's table in Orange County jail clothing and spoke the words I'd rehearsed in sleepless nights since his arrest. Your Honor, my son chose crime over family. For 15 years he manipulated my trust, borrowed money he never repaid, and finally conspired with criminals to rob me of everything my wife and I built together. Actions have consequences, and those consequences should reflect the seriousness of betraying the people who love you most. Donovan's eyes never left my face as I spoke, tears streaming down his cheeks in what looked like genuine remorse, but felt like another manipulation. Even now, facing prison time, he was trying to trigger my parental instincts with displays of vulnerability. The defendant exploited his father's trust for personal gain, Prosecutor Kim summarized in her closing argument. This wasn't a crime of desperation, but a calculated betrayal, spanning months of planning and coordination with known criminals. Judge Hendricks studied Donovan with the measuring gaze of someone who'd seen countless young men make choices that destroyed their families. When she spoke, her voice carried both authority and sadness. Mr. Voss, you've caused immeasurable pain to the man who raised you, supported you, and trusted you unconditionally. The court sentences you to 18 months in state prison with the possibility of parole in 12 months. contingent on completion of gambling addiction treatment and full restitution to your father. 18 months. It seemed both too little for the magnitude of his betrayal and too much for the boy I'd once taught to ride a bicycle. Justice was imperfect, measured in months and dollars, rather than broken hearts and shattered trust. That evening, Detective Brooks called with a final piece of business. Mr. Voss, your son has requested a prison visit. He wants to speak with you before his transfer to state custody. The request hung in the air between us like a final test of my resolve. 37 years of fatherhood pulling against 3 weeks of betrayal and criminal conspiracy. Detective, I appreciate you letting me know. Please tell my son that some bridges once burned can't be rebuilt. I have nothing left to say to him. I understand, sir. I'll pass along your message. As I hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't experienced since finding that USB drive in my basement wall. Peace. Not happiness, not satisfaction, but the quiet peace that comes from making difficult decisions correctly. Justice was served, but the real healing was just beginning. The legal system had processed my son's crimes with appropriate consequences, but rebuilding a life after such betrayal would require something deeper than courtroom victories. 1 month after the courthouse steps and final rejection, I discovered what peace actually felt like. It arrived quietly, like morning light filtering through my kitchen windows, bringing with it the simple pleasure of coffee without anxiety, newspapers without dread, and silence that felt like sanctuary rather than emptiness. My morning routine had evolved into something Beatrice would have recognized. Methodical, purposeful, but no longer shadowed by the fear of what my phone might bring. The surveillance cameras remained active, but now they showed only ordinary neighborhood life, children walking to school. Delivery trucks, Cordelia tending her roses with the same precision she'd once applied to FBI financial crimes. You're looking better, Clarence, she observed during one of our regular coffee visits. More settled. I feel like I can breathe again, I admitted, surprising myself with the honesty. For the first time in years, maybe decades, I'm not waiting for the other shoe to drop. The afternoon brought new purpose. The Portland Senior Center had welcomed my offer to volunteer teaching elderly residents about financial security and fraud prevention. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I found myself in their community room, sharing hard-earned wisdom with people who understood the vulnerability that comes with fixed incomes and trusting hearts. The key is documentation. I explained to a group of 12 seniors holding up copies of Beatrice's meticulous records. Write everything down. Every loan, every request, every promise. Family members who love you won't mind the paperwork. Margaret Chen, an 82-year-old retired librarian, raised her hand. What if it's your own child asking? The question hit close to home, but I'd learned to answer it without flinching. Especially if it's your own child, Margaret. Love doesn't require blind trust. Sometimes the hardest love is the kind that says no. The community room fell silent as my words settled, among people who'd spent decades navigating the complex terrain of family loyalty and self-protection. Several heads nodded with recognition I wasn't the only parent who'd learned this lesson the hard way. Evening walks had become sacred time, often ending at Riverside Cemetery, where Beatrice rested beneath a simple granite stone that read, "Beloved wife, devoted nurse, wise woman." I'd taken to bringing folding chairs, settling in for conversations with someone who could no longer answer, but whose presence felt more real than many living relationships. Beatrice, you were right about tough love. It saved our family's honor, I said during one October visit, watching maple leaves drift across her grave like natural confetti. I know you can't hear me, but I needed to say it out loud. Your wisdom protected us both, even after you were gone. The wind rustled through the cemetery's old oak trees, and for a moment I could almost hear her voice. Arnold, protecting what we built together is the greatest love. That night, I reread her final letter by lamplight, the paper soft from handling, but the words as sharp as ever. Her prediction about Donovan's dangerous trajectory had been heartbreakingly accurate, but so had her faith in my ability to make the right choice when it mattered most. The letter's closing paragraph had become my guiding principle. Some bridges burn so others can be built stronger. Don't mourn the relationship that failed. Celebrate the values that endured. Help others learn what we learned too late. Those words had inspired my newest project, a fraud prevention workshop series for elderly Oregonians, developed in partnership with Detective Brooks and the Portland Police Bureau. We'd already scheduled presentations at 6 senior centers, sharing real-world strategies for protecting life savings from family manipulation and criminal schemes. Mr. Voss, your experience could help hundreds of people, Detective Brooks had said when I proposed the program. Turning personal pain into public service, that's how healing happens. As winter approached, I found myself looking forward rather than backward, for the first time since Beatrice's death. My son's betrayal had nearly destroyed everything we'd built, but it had also revealed strengths I didn't know I possessed, and connected me with a community I'd never known existed. The house felt different now, not empty but peaceful, not lonely but independent. I'd survived the worst kind of family betrayal, and emerged with my values intact, my community stronger, and my purpose clearer than it had been in years. Sometimes the hardest love protects what matters most: family honor, community trust, and the values that built America. Beatrice had understood this truth before I did, and now her wisdom lived on in every senior citizen I helped to protect, every fraud I helped prevent, every family I helped save from the heartbreak we'd endured.